Earth and it's going to smash us and we got to get off and find another planet in a hurry. And you have 10 minutes with an index card to tell all of the whatever you're taking with you. And, you know, I'm thinking, don't forget the tomato seeds, don't forget the mango seeds. I did this years ago with a group in Miami at St. Thomas University. They had a team teaching with 5 professors. The title of the course was Bioregion and Sustainability. And one of the professors took a suitcase full of chocolate bars, but not a single cacao seed nor sugar cane. And the title of the course was Bioregion and Sustainability. When Kevin turned in his card, and I don't know him, but on Planet X, I certainly want to be your neighbor, because I forgot to bring tools. I brought seeds. I'm thinking if I bring cotton, I can make string, I can make rope, I can make cloth. And of course, I want not to forget rice and corn and wheat and all of those important basic foods. I still have your card, and excuse me for exposing.
That's all right.
But you brought digging forks, pickaxes, shovels, hay forks, hoes, axes, and you didn't forget to bring a file. You didn't bring mechanical or gas operated stuff because you were thoughtful enough to think, we have no idea. But you did bring a solar water pump. You didn't forget to bring a banana corn, cassava cuttings, sweet potato slips, yams, the true yams, laying hens, pigs, goats. Goats can eat anything. And you brought, I had to look up in the books to find what is Napier grass to feed your chickens and goats and pigs and whatever. Potato seeds, banana corn, winter squash, sorghum seeds. And you didn't forget to bring a lighter. And one lady brought a magnifying glass because if you have sunshine, you can make fire with that. Have you tried it? Be careful. It can sure burn you. Pruning shears, handsaw, encyclopedia, pocket knife, pigeon pea seeds, hazelnut seeds, carrot seeds, and brassica seeds. Anyone that is just prepared to go to another planet, I am suspect that you came from another planet, the planet Earth. So help me, all of you. Look at every word he says and see if you can detect any little clues that he is from another planet. Kevin Cruz.
Thank you.
Can someone dim the lights back there and then sit in by the door? That sounds a little bit much.
Maybe just the front ones or something? I'm not sure.
Just so you can see the screen a little better.
Is that better?
Yeah, it seems like it.
Hello? I think I'm just gonna. Could you guys hear me all right? Is everyone can hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna turn this microphone off just because I like to project a little bit. All right, well, I have a lot to say and a lot to get through, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. My name is Kevin Cruz, and I'm going to do a little intro here, kind of to describe what exactly I do and why I do them, and I'll tell you a little bit of my story. So, here we go. So this is in Honduras, in a small village in central Honduras called Las Guacamayas. This is where my family and I own 3 or 4 acres, and this was taken around 2015. Kind of a point in my life where I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I was kind of just working odd jobs and not really sure what my purpose was. And this trip really, really means a lot to me because this is when I sort of started on the trajectory of farming, which is what I do now. And the reason why was because I went to this small village, and I went to this small village growing up my entire life. It just kind of, you hit an age where you start to understand things a little better. I saw the way the villagers were a part of their food. From the age of 6, 7, people are working in the fields. You have little 7-year-olds herding cattle from one paddock to the next, working in the fields. School is kind of like an afterthought for a lot of the kids because you have to work the fields. And from a young, could you guys see this picture's okay, or is it a little dark? It's a little dark to me, but
Maybe the light should come down.
maybe the light's a little dimmer.
Yeah. Try making sure. There should be a little slide on the side.
Let me see if I can put the brightness up as well here.
There
There we go. That's a little better, a little more. Yeah, a little more. You could probably go down.
Yeah, turn it up.
You might as well just turn it on at this point. There it is. All right, let's just go. Let's just do that. So I'm much more of a visual person. So I want the photos to be shown because there's a lot of photos, and that's just the way my brain works. So that's what I'm going to show. So from a young age, people here are already working with corn. This is Hennessy's, and this is my uncle shelling beans. And I really enjoyed that life. It was it's something that a lot of us here don't partake in as much. And even though the diet is a little limited here, it's a lot of corn, a lot of beans, and nothing much in between. Like it's very basic because you eat what you grow. And for subsistence farmers, crops like these are the things that can sustain you and feed you relatively easily. And I left this trip in 2015 back to the States, back to Florida, with a fire under me to learn how to farm. I wanted to be closer to my food, and I wanted to just get my hands in the dirt and felt what that feeling was like. So I came back to Naples and searched my closest organic farm, and it was in Yoni Organic Farm, which is here in the Estates off of Mockley Road, and this is his farm. And I worked there for one season, 2015, 2016, and I learned a lot from Nick. Nick's the farmer, Nick Batty, Nick and his wife, Natalie. And they really brought me under the wing and they taught me a lot. But little did I know that was kind of just training wheels for what was to come next in my life. I did a little hitchhiking and traveling up the East Coast and subsequently the West Coast, and ended up in Oregon. This is Corvallis, Oregon, and this is the farm. This is the actual farm where I learned about farming, and not only about the how-to, but the reality behind our food. A lot of our food is harvested, especially organic food, because you can't use pesticides, you can't use different chemicals that you can in conventional farming. So a lot more labor is needed for organic farms. And I didn't really realize, I've always heard that, a lot of migrant labor harvests our food, and most of our food comes from the hands of migrant labor. But I never really realized it until I was actually working on a farm that was big enough to like feed a substantial amount of people. This farm was a 30-year-old farm, and they needed a lot of manpower to harvest their food. So here we are, weeding onions for the fall/winter. You can see I took this picture from the back because I was always so much slower than the rest of the crew, so I was always in the back. And here we are harvesting sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes. Really, really awesome crop to grow for the fall in northern climates. And I was just taken aback by the camaraderie, by the just how brutal this work is, and how a lot of these, I had the choice to, leave whenever I wanted to, because I didn't have to be a farmhand. I kind of just chose it because I wanted to learn. But there's a lot of people. This is my partner Laura, and she was on the women's crew, and a lot of these people have to work 6 days a week, 10-hour days, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but in a lot of states, including Florida, there's agricultural exemption laws where you don't have to pay your workers overtime after 40 hours. So all of us were working 60 hours plus a week, not getting any overtime at all. In my entire time working there, I saw my mother and a lot of these ladies, and it broke my heart seeing their I spent 3 years on that farm, and my body, I probably lost about a good 10 years on my body because of the back-breaking work that we had to do day after day. And I can only imagine how these ladies' bodies are feeling, but there's some more pictures of the farm, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, and it really made me aware of the hands behind the food that we eat every day. It really made me appreciate them so much more. And here's Don Cedillo. He's the carrot stacking master. He's the one that taught me the artistry of harvesting vegetables. Not just there's the work side of things, but then there's the artistry side of things. And he really taught me how to make beautiful bunches and put a lot of care into harvesting. And here are my friends Carlos and Margarita. They are the ones I kind of became very good friends with, and here we are harvesting fruits of our labor. And we are harvesting. We worked a full day on this day, I remember. And after a full long day of working in the fields, we came back to the fields so that we can go harvest some weeds, quote unquote. These weeds, what we consider weeds here in the States, some sort of amaranth, I think. In Guatemala, they consider it a delicacy, so we went back and harvested a lot of those greens. But my time came to an end with that farm, and I really wanted to broaden my horizons a little bit more. And like I said, I became very good friends with them. And their family was in the highlands of Guatemala, in a town called Todos Santos, Cuchumatan. And I asked them if I could go visit their family, and they said, sure, why not? And I said, okay, cool, I'm going. And here are some pictures of the Guatemala highlands. Wow. And it's high up there. Beautiful. I was like, oh, it's Guatemala, sure, it's the tropics, it's not gonna be that cold. Of course, I'll just bring a couple of long sleeves and that's it. I was shivering 99% of my time there because I did not prepare correctly. We were at like 11,000, 12,000 feet in elevation here. This is a bus, this is not a plane. Just to let you know, that's not a plane. So I got to see a lot of cool and different landscapes in my travels. And here we are, this lady she saw that I was into the different foods in that area, so she took me aside and showed me all the different crazy foods that were growing in their little house gardens. Here's a tamarillo, if you guys are familiar with that tree tomato as well. It's a relative of the tomato, but it has a sort of sweet, sour flavor profile to it. It's amazing. Here's some sort of wild raspberries that she's harvesting. They were so well connected to their food, and they knew every single green that was edible in their landscape, and it was admired that because as a farmer, I just knew the crops that I knew how to grow. And they showed me that there's so many more foods that are available to us if we have the knowledge to look for it. And there she is preparing some elephant ear leaves. These are very, very, you need to prepare them in a certain way. If not, then they can tickle your mouth in a not so pleasant way. And here's some sort of a nona, I'm not sure what it is, but she gave me that. And again, I was just taken aback by how food-centric the culture was. And a lot of the indigenous people of the Guatemalan highlands and in Guatemala in general, Spanish is their second language. So they speak different dialects, Mayan dialects. So there was a lot of them making fun of me and me trying to understand what they were saying, and just it was to hear the dialects going on in the background and to see how well connected they were with the food just filled me with more passion to continue pursuing my growing and food interests. And then I visited Carlos's property, which was just about 30 minutes down the hill, which is a lot lower elevation. So coffee was the main cash crop in that area. So I got to work with the coffee plants. I got to haul bags of coffee on my back. It's a lot harder than it looks. I thought, I'm a pretty athletic person, and I thought, kind of got my ego up, and I said, I could do this. There were like, 20, there were young women hauling these bags of coffee up the hill. I thought, well, I could totally do that. Check this out. I put one of those bags on my back, and I could hardly make it up the hill. I had to stop like 4 or 5 times. It was one of the most intense things I've ever done in my life, and the coffee workers have to do that 4 or 5 times a day for multiple days during the harvest. The work ethic is just incredible. And there's Carlos's dad overlooking his pot of corn. Again, just very connected. And my next stop in the Guatemala journey was in in Chel, which is a very, very, very remote part of Guatemala. As you can tell, that's the only road. That's one way in, one way out. A couple donkeys could hardly go through there. It was in the middle of nowhere. And Michael Ewens, E-W-E-N-S, he lives there full time. He's an American, I think from Oregon actually. And his son was in the Iraq War, one of the wars in the early 2000s, and passed away and was killed in the war. And the government gave him some sort of settlement for his son's death, and he vowed to use that money to help a community in Guatemala, and that's what he did with that money. And from that day going forward, he continued to help different villages in Guatemala, and now he runs an organization called the Ripple Effect, and they do water projects. So they get water from the springs from the top of the mountains, and they pipe them to the different villages so that people can have clean drinking water and things of that nature. So I learned a lot from him. It was an amazing experience, and this is different parts of the operation. We had a tree nursery filled with native and non-native plants that are helpful. So we any villager who was interested could come by and get some trees, and we did gardening lessons. So we had a sort of demonstration gardens at the main facilities, and then we would distribute plants to a group of ladies in different villages and teach how to sort of grow specific plants at your house. And actually Echo in Fort Myers, if you guys are familiar with Echo, they were partners with the Ripple Effect, and they would send a lot of seeds to Michael and the cause. So a cool connection there. And there I am handing out piglets. So we raised piglets, and we would go to different villages and hand out piglets. So I was really, really, really just fascinated with building resilience in these communities. These are very resilient people, but resilience only gets you so far if the resources aren't there. So that was one thing I was seeing on my travels, like, and the reason why there were so many Guatemalan immigrants and Mexican immigrants and immigrants in general that go to the States to work on these farms, to work these hard labor jobs, was because the lack of resources in these villages, in these countries. And I was seeing it firsthand. You know, I was in the village watching and seeing how isolated these places were and how little resources actually made it to these villages. So, you know, just I was taking it all in. And then we visited, we hiked like 2 or 3 hours to get to this place. And we visited this village where we were gonna do a future water project. And that's where we met this man right here. He was the mayor of the village, but he wasn't the political mayor. There's 2 mayors in a lot of these Guatemalan villages. There's the political mayor, and then there's the indigenous mayor. So the indigenous mayor sort of handled things regarding the land and land usage and just was more in touch with the land, whereas the political mayor was more in touch with the bureaucracy of things. And just seeing the way this man knew this landscape inside and out, the way you can tell from his facial expression and just the way he carried himself that he was one with this land and his village. It was something that I would never forget. And I was a changed man after that village visit for sure. And I wanted to be more like this man and be more in touch with the land that I live in. And here he is bushwhacking the way through to get to the spring that's located up the mountain, and here he is again, just overlooking this beautiful valley. So, mind you, this is all taking place in early 2020. As we all know, something happened very soon after. And then my next visit was in I was getting a little tired of being in the middle of nowhere, so I went to a more touristy place. This is Lake Atitlan, where a lot of European and American tourists go. It's kind of a center for a lot of hippie and spiritual people. So it was kind of an awkward experience. But either way, I just wanted to check it out, and there was a cool farm there where some expats one from Ireland and one from the States started a small permaculture farm where we had goats, chickens, we had bananas, we had a very diversified set of foods. And I got here March 16th, 2020, and then the beginning of the pandemic happened. So I was originally planning to go to my property in Honduras to go plant some seeds and start, becoming more resilient with the land. But I got trapped in Guatemala. So I was trapped there, and we all know what happened with the supply chain when the pandemic hit, huh? At least in the States, toilet paper was hard to come by. At least that's what I heard, because I was here. But here, toilet paper was the least of the concerns. People were not getting the shipments of corn into these tiny villages. Thankfully, I was in a more touristy spot, so we had our own sort of Eden there. We had everything to our disposal. Here we have huge yucca roots, and we had chickens that we ate and used as fertilizer. It was a very, very well-rounded system. It really made me. It really woke me up to the fact that things can happen in this world, and if we're not prepared, then we might pay the price for it one way or the other. And being in a place where a lot more resources were, it really made a difference. And it really got me thinking, we're only as resilient as the society we live in. You guys seen when the cargo ship got caught in the Suez Canal? What happens if that happens again? We never know. We live in such a globalized world right now. The smallest mishap in the supply chain means that we are at risk, trickle down, and especially people in the middle of nowhere, Guatemala, who the resources are limited already. They were the ones that were really struggling. And this is just so you're not looking at the chickens. this is one of my last days in Guatemala. I was probably about 10 pounds lighter. I went through a bout of parasites, and I was ready to get back to the States. But either way, I learned a lot from that visit, and I brought back a lot of those experiences with me. And this is where, so that was a little intro, kind of describing what my past couple years have been like, working in the farms and having this amazing, albeit very scary travels in Guatemala. And it really got me thinking about food security. So I ended up moving back to Florida with my parents. My sister just had a baby, so I figured it was a perfect time to put everything that I've been learning into practice. And that's what I did. But before we get into my property and my farm that I'm starting, and why I'm regenerating land, I want to first go do a little history lesson and sort of to understand why we need to regenerate land. We have to understand how did the land become degraded in the first place. There's a lot of land in this world that is torn to bits, torn to shreds because of our human impact. And there's one story that is kind of epitomizes it all. And that's the story of the tumbleweed. This is an icon of the American West, right? The old school West and the old movies. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that this plant is from North America, right? It's so common everywhere in the desert. But in fact, it isn't. It comes from Russia. And that is where the story starts. Catherine the Great was a German-born princess who married into Russian aristocracy, and she granted the German population refuge into, right here we have the Volga River Valley. So the Volga River Valley was a place where there wasn't a lot of people. It was in the middle of nowhere, and they needed people to live there because they were getting attacked by the Mongols and the Kyrgyz, and it was a very hard place to live. So she granted, are you guys familiar with Mennonites and the Mennonite cultures? Mm-hmm. So she granted a lot of Mennonite colonists access to the Volga River Valley to start a new life there, because Germany was going through, as Europe always is, they're always going to war. There was a war in Europe at the time, so the Mennonites are pacifists and they are anti-war, and they wanted to escape the war in Germany, and so they ended up in the Volga River Valley, and so they went. They went to a very, very, very beautiful valley, very, very fertile, but the valley itself was the only fertile part. The rest of this place was very, very harsh living. This is the steppe. You guys are familiar with the steppe, S-T-E-P-P-E? It's a very open grasslands, very cold during the winter, extremely hard place to live. But the Volga, the German Mennonites, which they're now called the Volga Germans because of the Volga River Valley, they were able to live there and handle the nomadic indigenous tribes there, who were badass hunters and very dangerous people. So they were able to survive there because what did they bring along with them in this very arid, hard to deal with landscape? They brought with them their heirloom turkey red winter wheat. It was a very, very strong wheat that did very well in Germany and did very well in the Russian steppe. And in fact, year after year, it got more resilient and stronger and stronger. And over the years, they were able to have many colonies, and they populated the Volga River Valley abundantly. They planted their wheat fields, and that was their bread and butter. You know, they literally make bread out of it. They make beer out of it. They fed their animals with the hay. It was just, they were thriving in a place where nobody ever wanted to go. It was a no man's land pretty much, and the Volga Germans somehow made it work through their resiliency and tenacity. They made it work, and by 1863 or so, or I'm not sure when, 100 years after they went to the Volga River Valley, they had 250,000 people there. They did it. They did what nobody thought possible. They went to the middle of the Russian hinterland and made it work. And they were living happily ever after until 1871, when Tsar Alexander II and the Russian nation were getting jealous of them. They were doing so well, and they didn't have to go to the army. So they were forced to leave. They revoked the manifesto that Catherine the Great imparted 100 years earlier, and they were forced to go because they were just doing a little too well for the Russians. So this group of German immigrants that moved to Russia had to move again. And where do you think they went? That story takes us to the U.S. The U.S. and westward expansion, manifest destiny. We were moving from the east side of the country and moving to the west, correct? And we were bringing technology, capitalism, and just civilization to the savages, the Native Americans, and for the colonists and the settlers, westward expansion looked sort of like this. But for the native flora and fauna and Native Americans that were there, westward expansion looked a little more like this. It was a lot of destruction and death, unfortunately, for the natives. And a large part of it was because of the Transcontinental Railroad. We became a much more resilient nation because we were able to go from one coast to the next. And the Chinese immigrants were the ones that actually built most of the railroads. So if it wasn't for the Chinese immigrants who came and built a lot of the railroads, we as a nation wouldn't be as resilient as we are today. And you would see a lot of photos of the railroad as it was getting built. And unfortunately, they were kind of brushed under the rug of history. And in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act came into effect. So we effectively kicked them out of the U.S. And you can see here, the Great Plains is largely unpopulated until the Transcontinental Railroad. And you can see here South Florida, which is why I'm bringing all this up. It's going to come to a point at some point, trust me. Here, South Florida is still uninhabited. So in the same way that the Great Plains was one of the final frontiers of this nation, so was South Florida, and you'll see why. So the Great Plains needed to be settled, and how do you do that? Well, unfortunately, this is a part of our country's history, and I'm sad to recount the history, but this is what happened. The Great Plains, a once abundant landscape with amazing biodiversity, amazing flora and fauna, kind of got decimated over the years by us, the settlers, and we destroyed the buffalo that were once so sacred to the Plains Indians. And here's a little quote. Here's a little infographic here about what happened during that slaughter. And in just 2 years, over 4 million buffalo were slaughtered. And by the 1880s, over 30 million buffalo had been slaughtered. And buffalo were nearly exterminated if it weren't for some kind souls who kept some in captivity. But just for more perspective, this is the destruction that we laid upon the Great Plains in the name of progress and civilization. And the buffalo was, sacred to the Plains Indians. They used every single part of the buffalo, the bison. And it wasn't only sacred to the Indians, it was sacred to the landscape. They were a keystone species. If you're familiar with what keystone species are, they are species that are essential to the community in the landscape. So one of the primary examples of a keystone species is the beaver. If you guys are familiar with beavers, they make abundant wild habitat for the rest of the river ecosystem. And so the bison did the same. So because of them, so many other species were able to live and thrive. They, in years of drought and years of intense drought, they would keep the plains fertile because they would poop and they would pee everywhere in the plains. So they were the epitome of just regeneration and keeping the landscape productive and abundant. And as one of my favorite biologists says, biological diversity is the key to the maintenance of the world as we know it. Eliminate one species and another increases to take its place. Eliminate a great many species and the local ecosystem starts to decay. And so the bison were nearly eliminated, and the days of the abundance of the Great Plains were also nearly eliminated, and the Plains Indians did not have the plains anymore. And long story short, what happened was the Dust Bowl, as we all know. And the Volga Germans came to the plains, settled the plains, and it was because of them that the Middle America became the breadbasket of America. They brought their turkey red wheat, and with that they brought seeds of Russian thistle, also known as tumbleweeds. And you usually see tumbleweeds, dry and kind of just flowing in the wind, and you don't really see them when they're actually flowering and an actual plant. So you can see the beauty of this plant, and you can see how amidst the middle of nothing, they can grow. They're so resilient and so tough that they can grow in the middle of nowhere. And so the plains were settled. Wheat was planted, and people were living. It was happening. World War I happens, and the wheat prices skyrocket. And so people were planting wheat left and right. What was once the abundant grasslands of the Great Plains were getting ripped up by farmers left and right, by the Volga Germans, by everybody pretty much. And the Roaring '20s happened. Everyone was feeling good, And a lot of people tried to cash in on the fact that the wheat prices were so good, that the wheat was booming. And they were called suitcase farmers. They came from big cities, bought some land in the Great Plains, farmed it for 1 year, got rich, and left. That was a suitcase farmer. So imagine a lot of suitcase farmers just ripping up the land for many years. Eventually, the land got exhausted. And of course, 1929, the stock market crashes. And what happens? The Great Dust Bowl of the 30s. And very harrowing images. It's very sad, I know, but with this is the lowest of the low. This is the lowest that we can go, correct? And it's only up from here. And this was a tragic part of our history. People's livelihoods were completely ruined, and mostly due to our own fault, unfortunately. like I said, it sucks to say this, but we cause that on ourselves. And if you guys read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, he details the life of the Okies and of the people who left middle America to go find jobs somewhere else, but they kind of couldn't. People were not welcoming of the Okies, and those that did stay, the one thing that kept them alive after, after the Dust Bowl, after everyone else in this country called them Okies and just couldn't help them after the government couldn't help them, the one thing that kept them alive was the Russian thistle, an invasive species. Remember, they brought it from Europe, and it was a weed. Nobody liked it. Everyone hated it when they were growing wheat. It was the one thing that people hated the most. But in these hard times in the 30s, when nothing else was growing, not a single thing would grow, not a single thing, not a drop of water would grow. This was the only thing that would grow. And I'll just read a little part of it. During the Dust Bowl, farmers took to using the plant in place of traditional hay. Kansas produced over 350,000 tons of thistle hay in 1934. It's credited by some as having saved the cattle industry. And it wasn't just cattle that survived on the plant. People turned to it to sustain themselves too. They ate canned tumbleweeds. So this is a story of resilience. I know it was a long story, kind of a sad one, but that's just because I wanted to show the fact that we humans have a lot of power in our hands. We can either destroy or we can build. And unfortunately for the Dust Bowl, we did a lot of destruction. And I bring that story up because the story of South Florida is very similar. This is what South Florida looked like for millennia, pretty much. This was a no man's land in and of itself, except I hesitate to call it land because there wasn't much land to begin with. But this is what South Florida would have looked like had it not been for us wanting to conquer the last little bit of land left in the United States. And this is how this is what it looked like as well. This is how people got around. This is how the Seminole and the Miccosukes and all the tribes in South Florida got around, with dugout canoes. We were a water people here. We did everything in the water. The water was part of South Florida. And if it wasn't for Broward and Flagler, which are names that you'll see around here in Florida, Flagler Street, Broward County, the ambition of Broward and Flagler helped to dredge the canals, dredge South Florida and drain the swamp of South Florida so that we humans could actually live here and make a living for ourselves here in South Florida. And so we dredged as much as we can of South Florida. We dredged and we dredged and we dredged. We built canals. We made it hospitable for us. Which, if I were living in those days, I would be opposed to something like this. But being raised here all my life, I'm happy that this happened because I love South Florida. And so here's a cool photo of LaBelle. This was in the early 1900s. LaBelle completely underwater, and there were some hiccups along the way. There was a lot of flooding that happened, and we kept dredging and kept making canals and pretty much altered the South Florida ecosystem in a very, very intense way. And you can see here, this was how it was. Lake Okeechobee would overflow, and then the flow of Lake Okeechobee would slowly but surely and gently go down and down and down until it went into the Atlantic. It was a very gradual, very slow process. We were one of the greatest wetland ecosystems in the entire world. There was not a lot of places like this in the world. Very, very unique ecosystem that we're a part of here in South Florida. And unfortunately, through the dredging and through the canal making, like I said, it's bittersweet. I am so lucky that I live here and I love South Florida, but this is not the way South Florida is supposed to look. We live in a very completely artificial and man-made ecosystem. And because of that, we have, anybody know what this is? Oh, okay. Anybody know what this is? Ear leaf acacia. Anybody know what this is? Carrot wood. Anybody know what this is? Melaleuca. Anybody know what this is? This is kind of a harder one. This is called bishop wood. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, giant schefflera, obviously. What about this? Sure, we all know what this is. And anybody know what this is?
Castor bean.
Castor bean, correct. What about this? Chinese crown orchid, exactly. And this? Air potato. And how, okay. Yeah. Okay, so what do all those things have in common? They're all invasive species. Now, this is kind of the main rhetoric of all these species, correct? They are the problem. But let's take it back a little bit. You got to remember, what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing? What's the real problem here? Was it all these species that I just talked about? Or was it the fact that we completely changed the native natural landscape of this ecosystem? I would argue for the latter. None of these invasive species would be here if it wasn't for us in the first place. And so, all of these invasive species are just trying to fix the landscape that we had completely destroyed throughout our years of dredging and canal making and this and that, and that is their role. Nature is trying to put the Band-Aid on all the scars that we had afflicted her through all the dredging and canals. So it's hard to, in one way, I'm not saying that invasive species are good for this ecosystem, but they're trying their hardest to rebuild this ecosystem from scratch, because it's not the same ecosystem anymore, unfortunately. So canals have funneled the water into smaller land areas. So let's just start here. The Everglades is half the size it was a century ago. Most of the land was lost to sugarcane, to vegetable and citrus farms. Much of the agriculture areas now are becoming housing developments and homes to thousands of people. Canals have funneled the water into smaller land areas. The original sheet flow of the original area of the original Everglades is pretty much gone. The natural flood and drought cycles are exaggerated. Extremely wet years often leave much of the Everglades underwater, and us. I'm not sure about you guys, but last year seemed like a pretty rough. How many of you guys have been living here for many, many years? Was last year one of the worst flooding you guys have ever seen? Or is it pretty normal, pretty typical?
One place nearby.
Yeah?
Irma was the worst.
Irma was the worst, yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up here, and I've only been for 20 plus years, and from what I remember, it doesn't seem to get any better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This flooding and drying and wildfires seem to only become more exacerbated. So dry years leave the land parched. Both extremes upset the natural rhythms of wildlife. Reproduction declines, food becomes scarce. So the water is altered as well as timing. Formerly deep areas are dry now. Water shoved up to the shallower tracts. So fewer areas where fish are concentrated for breeding, for food sources for birds and other animals at a certain times of year are kind of gone now. Nutrients and excessive nutrients and fertilizer from farmlands get flushed into the Everglades, causing a series of changes, including an explosion of cattail plants and red tide, as we all know. And the fresh water that once nourished the Everglades often gets pumped into the ocean via the canals. And so when we look at it like that, who is the actual problem here? Are all these plants the problem here, or are we the problem here? That's the question that I'm really trying to get across here, because the reality is we are the actual #1 invasive species here. Above all of these here, we are actually the #1 invasive species. None of these plants would be here if it weren't for us. Most of these plants we brought in for landscaping and decoration and for potential use for crops and stuff like that, and they have escaped cultivation. And with these new conditions, they have been spreading like wildfire. So it's because of us that these are a problem in the first place. And if you are familiar with permaculture practices, one of the main slogans is, the problem is the solution. So we can utilize these plants to our favor. And Mother Nature already is. Ask anybody who keeps bees and ask them what one of the primary sources of nectar is for the bees here in South Florida. Brazilian pepper. It's the truth. Well, all these companies and marketing people want to talk about saving the bees. Honestly, the Brazilian pepper is doing more to save the bees than any of those catchy phrases in marketing is ever going to do for the bees.
It's killing them?
Hmm?
What, no food, it's food. Oh,
Yeah, they feed them. They flower so much,
Okay.
and they. Here, I'll show you the picture of the Brazilian pepper. Those are all the peppers, but before they were peppers, they were flowers. So they are helping to stabilize the ditches. If you ever drive down around the estates, you see that they're mainly along the ditches on the edges of the woodlots. They're helping to stabilize the ditches, and they provide so much shelter for all the animals in all the wildlife. Whereas we are clear cutting forests so that we can put up new multi-million-dollar houses and complexes and golf courses, which I'm not opposed to. That's the fate of Florida. That since day one we were real estate we were destined for development. So I'm not one of those people that say we should stop building. But maybe we should start taking these plants into consideration, start looking at them with a different viewpoint. Looking at them as if they are trying to help the wildlife and help Mother Nature build back into a much more resilient and abundant place.
Is there something we could plant in their place?
Yeah, exactly, yep, and I'm gonna get there. So these plants are not the end all be all. They're not what we want. Obviously, I don't want any of these invasive species taking over. Nobody wants that. But they are a scaffolding. How many people are here are builders or know anything about building and know how important scaffolding is for a building? Well, when you build a building, you need scaffolding to be able to go up to the higher parts of the building and work and put materials and finish the building. But when the building's ready for public use, the scaffold is not there anymore. And that's what these plants are trying to tell us. This is what nature is trying to tell us. She's like, Mother Nature sort of like is a mother, and we are her unruly kids, pretty much. And we are acting up, and she is giving us unconditional love. So we turned South Florida into an artificial landscape where us humans and other terrestrial beings could live. Because before that, the main being here was the manatee. That was the #1 herbivore. And obviously they swim. So we are converting it more to a place where we can live as humans. And Mother Nature, after we just completely destroyed her with the canal system, she's still giving us hints and clues like, okay, you guys want to live here, well, I'll give you plants that you can use for your life and for the betterment of your life. I'll give you resources, because before that, this was a swamp. And so she's given us resources in the form of these of these plants. And not all of them created equal. Some of them are far, far worse than others. But the ones that are more tree-like species are the ones that I'm interested in and that we should all be interested in, because they have untapped potential to help us create abundant and resilient landscapes. And that's where my project comes into play. So this is one of the main sort of befores and afters that I like to show. It's kind of pops. You can really see the difference. This is my backyard where there was some Brazilian pepper, a lot of earleaf acacias, and I utilized them in my favor so that I could build an abundant food forest like this. So this was just 6 months ago, if you can believe that. 6 to 8 months ago. So that is, we humans have the power to destroy, but guess what? We also have the power to regenerate. We as much, we are the problem, but we are also the solution. It's up to us to choose which one we're going to do. And this was how it looked at first. You can see there was a lot of bahia grass, or I'm not sure exactly what grass it was. It was just a thick mat of grass, which actually helped because it helped other species not to take root there, because their roots are so matted. So I didn't have it as bad as other people in terms of earleaf acacia and Brazilian pepper, but it was still there, definitely. And this is how it looks almost 2 years afterwards. This is what my system looks like right now. From this to this in less than 2 years. And I did that by utilizing very resilient plants. Some of them on the invasive species list, but a lot of them aren't. But they act very similarly to the invasive species that I just showed you. And we can all do this. This is very doable for any of us who live, especially those of us who live in the States. This is on about a 1/4 acre max. So you can really pack it in, and I'll sort of describe how I went about doing that. And I started small. I started with my hand tools, and I started yanking out the bahia grass, whatever it was, and I started working with the earleaf acacias, those invasive trees that grow literally everywhere here, especially in the pine sort of uplands. And I started hacking away at them, cutting them up, and utilizing them for mulch, because as we all know, here in South Florida, we have sand, absolute sand, not very nutritious sand, and we need to feed the soil life for it to be actual soil and not just sand. But I didn't have a connection for the mulch guys yet, so I had to work with what I had, which was Brazilian pepper, earleaf acacia, even the air potato, Caesar weed. I had anything that I could possibly get my hands on, I brought it to my property. I would go to the sides of the roads, and I would go to the empty lots and just go in there and gather big buckets full of acacia leaves and logs and all this stuff, and I would bring it to my house. And I planted things, and with those things, I planted I planted a lot of things, and I made sure that the wood was on the ground, that we had the mulch. This is the number one aspect in building soil is decomposed wood.
So you didn't chip it first?
I didn't chip it first. I didn't have a chipper. We have to.
Right.
We have this. When we talk about resiliency, we have to work with what we've got. When you're in the middle of nowhere in Honduras, which I am, and I'll show you a video later, you have to work with what you got, and this is what I had at the time. Obviously, I got mulch eventually, but for when I first started, it was just that, and I would plant in every single one of these little crevices and creases. I would plant tons and tons of seeds. Mother Nature, our tools are made out of iron, steel, wood. Mother Nature's tools are made out of seeds. plants, cuttings. That's what she uses to work the land and to make and to produce food. So we sort of have to combine the two and work together. And so you can see here more examples of what I did. So instead of, I ripped up the land for sure, but only temporarily. As soon as I ripped it up, I put a lot of things down, a lot of wood. And you know what eats wood? Mushrooms. Mushrooms love eating wood. And you know what eats mushrooms? Well, we'll see. We'll see. I have some photos up here. I had some help. This is my little cousin. She was into it. She was helping me chop up all these. Here you can see the earleaf acacia leaves. And I really like this picture because you can even see the Brazilian pepper right there.
Seeds.
Yeah, the seeds of the Brazilian pepper because I use Brazilian pepper as well. You know.
Have an issue with those sprouting back up?
Yeah, they did sprout back up every now and then, but when you interact with the land, you can, when they're yay high, you can just take it off. Or you can just, if I didn't have access to mulch, I would have just let that grow, and then tipped it, and then everyone who's worked with Brazilian pepper knows that if you cut it, guess what happens 3 days later? It just grows again. So you can use them as an unlimited supply of free mulch for yourself. When we see Brazilian peppers, we see them as this huge thicket, you know. But when you see them as little babies, they're like so puny. You can work with them and you can do things and you can shape them like a bonsai, you know. You can shape them how you want to when they're puny. But I opted not to do that because there are much better options for that. Like I said, I'm not trying to say that invasive species are good. I'm just saying we could use them to our advantage. So I chopped and chopped and chopped, and I dropped and dropped and dropped, and I planted in anything I could find. Remember, this is I'm trying to keep resilience as the #1 key. I didn't want to go full blast and spend tons of money, because what most people do is they'll prepare their land and they'll get all the trees that they want, all the trees that they've been reading about online, all the super expensive grafted mangoes and grafted fruit trees and grafted this and grafted that, and then guess what happens? An intense winter freeze kills every single thing. That can happen down here in South Florida. That happened to us, you know? And if we stay with the idea of being resilient, knowing that maybe a little down the line we can start integrating some more higher, more just like desirable plants, then we can, once the system is established and the microclimate is established, then we can go ahead and start thinking about putting in those fruit trees. But so I started very, very small, and I planted anything I can get. I went to the Cuban stores and got beans, all sorts of beans, and planted them. I got the little taro roots. I got cassavas from friends. I planted everything I could find. Eventually I got a tiller, which made the work way easier. And eventually I got access to mulch, which also made the work way easier. So you can see here, I'm making beds and I'm covering them super, super densely. You know, if I only had the invasive species to work with, I would have kept it very small. But now I have mulch. So now I'm able to just fill what was once barren dirt with tons and tons of life and tons of mulch and plant everything. I was going crazy. I was planting like I was going out of style. I would plant every single thing, every single day. I would put something in the ground because that's what Mother Nature wants. She wants to be fully dressed. You know, nobody wants to be outside butt naked. So I really wanted to stress the density of the plantings. So you can see here, things were starting to happen. This is probably about February, March of 2021 when I got back to the US. I planted everything I could get my hands on and very close to each other. I planted taro root, cassava root. These are beans that I got from the markets. I got sweet potato slips. I planted everything I could get my hands on. And again, you can see here the remnants of the earleaf acacia leaves. they really helped the beginning of the food forest. When the most people didn't have my back, guess who had my back? Good old ear leaf acacia. So, and the system started to grow some more and more. There's my little cousin harvesting some green beans that I had planted. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a design. I just planted things. I went to my friends' properties and planted cactus. This is prickly pear nopal, very good eating if you're used to that kind of stuff. Pigeon peas, everything. But I would buy them in bulk quantity. I would go to the Hispanic stores, the Asian stores, and buy big bags of beans and different things so that I could plant them, because it's a far more economical way of doing things. And things started to grow. Here's some more bananas and some beans. I started, like I said, I visited other friends' properties. I got cuttings from my good friend Jacob right here in Punta Gorda with and Matthew Reese, who's also in Punta Gorda. If you are familiar with them, they have amazing farms in Punta Gorda, and they'll be selling some plants here as well. But I kept planting and I kept chopping. Look at this here is Brazilian pepper as well. You can see some air potato up in there too, and some acacia, and those are all feeding these bananas. And so these bananas, they are part of my resilience plan as well, because bananas grow. And what's inside of bananas? A lot of liquid. There's a lot of liquid in it. Have you ever cut a banana and it just like starts splurting out? Well, when we think about resilience, we need to think about what happens if the electricity goes out and our well is not working. What happens if it doesn't rain for many months? Well, bananas are biological pumps. They pump up water from the ground and keep them in their stalks. So in times of intense drought, you can utilize the banana trunks as a means of fertilizer and irrigation at the same time. And so I planted a lot of bananas. But those bananas had to eat something first, you know? And a lot of that was the invasive species that we were just talking about. And a lot of it was mulch, of course, which is just ground up native plants. And here's the earleaf acacia that I worked with. I strategically pruned them so that when they re-sprouted in a way that worked into the system. And so here you can see, look at how this earleaf acacia, it sort of looks like it's supposed to be there now, right? Because it looks like it has a purpose. So my property is almost like a sanctuary for these invasive species that everyone hates, because I gave them purpose. I gave them a role. I gave them something to do. I gave them I gave them purpose. This tree is no longer with us anymore. I chopped it down because it fulfilled its function. I pruned it back. It started to grow back, and I wish I had pictures of how it looked. It was just this beautiful, enormous tree with luscious green growth, and it helped feed my other plants, all my bananas, all my little baby mangoes, and avocados. And that's another thing I did, was every single mango and avocado and any fruit that I would eat. Remember, Bonnie, when you brought in that mango, and I was like slurping on the seed, and I put the seed in because I was gonna go plant that, knowing, I know it's not gonna be true to type. I know it's not gonna true to seed. Might be better, it might be worse. You never know. But who knows the story of Johnny Appleseed, the myth of Johnny Appleseed, whatever. He just planted apple seeds everywhere he went. And if I've done some traveling, so I've seen a lot of places up north. There are crab apples. There's all these different kinds of wild apples all over the place. Because of that, because birds and people, and over the years they spread all these apple genetics all over the world, and we need to be doing the same for South Florida. So instead of Johnny Appleseed, it'll be Johnny Mango Seed or Johnny Avocado Seed. We should be we should be walking down one of these national forests or any of these trails and see mangoes coming off of a tree and seeing avocados. We have the power to do that. All we need to do is just plant these seeds. It's as simple as that. They might not be the best, or they could be very good. You just never know. Genetic diversity is a key part of building resilient ecosystems. And so to get back to the earleaf acacia, just wanted to show how it actually fit into the food forest. What was once just this scraggly looking tree in the middle of this scrub now looks like, wow, it looks like it's supposed to be there with all these other plants right next to it, helping everyone out. And so there I am watching the system grow as it was about knee height. You know, nowadays everything is way up above me, which is nice for my back. But then it was still in the early stages, and I utilized everything I could get my hands on. Sun hemp, which is a very, very important crop for southern farmers. It's used as a cover crop. Castor bean as well. It's a very, very fast-growing tree, and it shades the other baby trees underneath it. So you can't really see, but underneath that castor bean, I probably had a mango or an avocado. Because plants like to grow with plants. If you just have an orchard of mango trees and nothing else around it, those are some pretty lonely mango trees. And here I have castor. You can see how I utilize the castor. Remember, like I said, I'm not one for invasive species. I'm one for utilizing invasive species. Castor is one of them, so why not utilize them? Look at that free cardboard right there. Keeping the soil nice and covered. All the little millipedes and the wormies and all the little critters that really build soil life are able to hang out under there and have a little party with each other. Here's my turmeric crop, who they're able to feed as well. And this photo I really like as well because it shows the technology of nature, which is plants, and the technology of humans, which is steel and sharp blades, working together as one, so that we can make resilient food systems for the future generations to come, for our children, our children's children, and so on and so forth. And here is just another example of planting. You know, like I said, there was no strategy to this. It was just plant as many things as possible and then go from there. Like an author who writes a book, they don't edit while they're writing. They write, and then when they're done with the first draft, they'll go back and edit. It's sort of like this here. I plant, and then I go back and edit, see what I want to keep and see what I don't want to keep. And so here is another example. This is Napier grass that I utilized for mulch. Yep, chop and drop. It's some of the best stuff. You can feed it to your chickens. You can feed it to your goats if you have goats. You can feed it to any animal. They'll use it. You know, and it's good bedding as well once it dries up. And you can see just the amount of trees, the amount of plants that are here. This is Mexican sunflower, another quasi-invasive species here that kind of gets the pass because it has beautiful flowers and smells really good, and it has a lot of exposure on YouTube and stuff. That one kind of gets the pass for whatever reason. And remember I said with wood chips come, and with mulch comes mushrooms. And mushrooms are a key part of soil building here. And with mushrooms come millipedes. Millipedes eat fungal bodies, and they then poop. And then that poop is free fertilizer. You don't have to go to the stores anymore if you have your hardworking millipedes working for you to make your own free fertilizer. And there they are. This is my labor crew right here. I pay them in food, and that's about it. They don't require much. They do all the hard work for me. This is them eating some mushroom bodies. If you're familiar with Care to Grow mushrooms, our friend Russell, he gives me his old spent mushroom blocks, and I put them in a nice sheltered location, and I wet them, and then they start to produce mushrooms, and the millipedes go to town on the mushrooms. As you can see, I've never seen this many millipedes in a natural area. I do a lot of hiking, and I haven't seen this much life. And that's part of the reason why I do this, because I love to go hiking, but sometimes I don't want to leave my house. So I can just hike in my backyard and see amazing amounts of wildlife, like this legless lizard here. They love the mulch. They're super cool looking. They're not technically snakes, they're technically legless lizards. The black racer, who is acting like one of my trees, and is hunting the many lizards that are. This is like a huge jungle gym for all these animals. I love just sitting and watching the animals play with each other, and well, not play, they're eating each other. But it goes beyond just growing food. Growing food is just like one part of it. This is a botanical garden. Here, I'll show a better picture. This is my neighbor's property, and this is my property. Now, if you were an animal, which side do you think you would want to go hang out in? Okay, there you go.
Are you growing pine trees in there too?
Those were the native pine trees that were already there, that were regenerating back. I just take care of them. So you can see how, even though a lot of this stuff is introduced, you can see how the native pine trees are still working within the system. They are what we call the emergent species. They're the species that shoot up. They're very, as you know with pine, they don't give a lot of shade, so they're ideal for agroforestry, because they just keep growing up and up and up and up. And if you've seen some really mature pine trees, you see how tall they can get, and just long, slender trunks. So, like I was saying, this is part botanical garden, part farm, part hiking trail. I get the best of all the worlds by growing in this way. Whenever I want to take my dog out, I just take him back here, and he gets benefit out of it as well. He'll go to the Napier grass. The Napier grass is very prickly. It has like a lot of little hairs, and apparently, I guess it's good. Like it's like grit or something for his tummy. He beelines it to the Napier grass every time we go out. Not every time, but whenever he's feeling like he has a little tummy issue, he'll go out and interact with it, and he interacts with the little twigs around the ground too. Like he'll chew. Maybe there's like some sap in some of it. I don't know. I'm not a dog, but dogs are a little bit more in tune with their animal side than we are. So he's getting something out of it that I don't even know. I don't even know what it is. And of course, there's food coming out of the system without a lot of trying. These are foods that are adapted to the Caribbean, adapted to southern climates. Because even though we're technically part of the United States, South Florida, at least geographically and like climate-wise, is much more similar to Caribbean islands. And Caribbean foods, traditional Caribbean foods do a lot better in this climate. So here's some cassava that is growing that are harvested amongst the food forest. There's plenty of sweet potatoes growing all around, all over the place. I literally can't, there's too many sweet potatoes to keep track of. There's tropical squashes and pumpkins that have come up randomly and plant themselves right next to the Caesar weed, which I know we all hate, but I use them as well for fertilizer. So this squash was fed by the Caesar weed, and like I said, if you keep up with the Caesar weed, they won't get to the point where they become the nuisance that they are and stick to your clothes and everywhere in between. And there's resources. There's tons of seeds that are produced now that I can take to Honduras, where my family's from and where I'm doing another project, and I can take these seeds over and to keep regenerating land in other places. This is called jack bean, a very, very important nitrogen fixing crop for food forest purposes. There's some on sale as well. They're amazing, amazing crops. Jacob, they'll grow without any care. You could stick that into the ground and they will grow.
It's a weed.
It's pretty much, but it's a very, very hardy plant that fixes nitrogen and helps feed other plants. So
Is it edible?
so it is edible, but it's one of those you have to like make sure you eat it at the right time, kind of thing. When the beans are young, like a young fava bean, if you guys eat fava beans growing up, that's kind of the time that you can eat them. But there are so many other better beans in the world. I use these strictly for feeding my mangoes and my avocados. This is better plant food than it is human food. But you can feed that to animals. I'm pretty sure in Portuguese they call it feijão de porco, which is the pork bean. So maybe it's because they feed it to pigs. Either way, there's oh yeah, and here's more photos. Remember the Chinese crown orchid? For some reason, the Facebook groups, everyone, anytime anyone posts a picture of asking what this is, everyone is just like, destroy it, burn it, you could not have it in your thing. Which, I mean, I get it, like I said, it is, I understand where that's coming from, but look at how unassuming it is in the context of a food forest.
Well, it got here on its own, making it invasive, but it doesn't take over your yard.
Yeah, exactly.
And free orchids can stay in my yard.
Exactly.
They're not gonna take over my yard.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say, is that unfortunately a lot of these invasive species sort of get lumped into the same categories as others. And then people will say, oh, it's invasive, you have to get rid of it, just like you have to get rid of Brazilian pepper. Obviously Brazilian pepper is way different than this little orchid here. But a lot of people still have that same judgment towards something like this, just because it's lumped into the same category. And here is carrot wood, another invasive species that has one of the most beautiful new growth. I just love the way it looks. That's why I put this picture here, because it's just amazing new growth, and it's one of the best green manures as well. It's an amazing leaf. It's a thick leaf. If you chop it, it grows back so beautifully. And there's a recurring theme here with all these plants is if you chop it, it comes back like it's nobody's business. They're super strong, super resilient, and to build a resilient food forest, you need to have resilient plants. And they're oftentimes the plants that are demonized the most, that are the most helpful to us.
Well, the county won't let us have Brazilian pepper coming.
No, for sure.
If you want to build anything or change anything on your property, they need to.
Yeah, no, and of course, I'm using Brazilian pepper as an example of resilient plants, because they are emblematic of resilient plants here in South Florida. So, like I said,
You can always go collect them. If you wanted to chop and drop.
Oh yeah,
and
okay,
bring
yeah,
home
exactly.
from
If you want
the
to
lot
chop
next
drop.
door.
Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble with IFAS or the UF or any of the county people, so, this is,
Well, it's only if you want to build something.
yeah.
They don't buy you.
No, for sure. But I'm also planting other things that aren't, I'm just saying, I really want to stress the point that it's resilient plants that I'm talking about here. This is a very, very common landscaping plant here that is also somewhat invasive. It'll grow in the wild if you let it, but it doesn't do much. Does anybody know what this is? That's a poinciana. Royal point. That's one of my favorite things to collect. So I just go to, and I'll go to town and see all the Royal Poincianas, and I'm the crazy person in the middle of the parking lot, like climbing the Royal Poinciana trees, getting all the pods so that I can plant into my food forest. Same with the mahoganies. You know the native mahoganies that are everywhere. A big tree of my childhood. I loved playing with the little ball with the little seed pods. I have tons of native mahogany trees as well. So it's not just invasive species that are resilient. There are also a lot of native plants that are resilient, like this oak here that nature planted. There's a lot of oaks on my property. I guess the wildlife see my food forest as a sanctuary and bring a lot of seeds there. So you start to see that you are not the only one in this dance of establishing abundant and resilient systems, nature starts to see like, oh man, this guy's got it going on. Let's go over there, and then nature will start bringing their own plants. So there's a lot of native oaks that I see come up. A lot of random. What else comes up just randomly? Yes.
What kind of oak is it?
I don't know the oak identification.
That stuff all over the yard.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the oak identification. There's a lot of like water oak and lower oak, so I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, Mother Nature will plant her own things as well. And here you can see a more fully fledged version of what was absolutely nothing less than 2 years ago into this. Just from planting seeds. And now after almost 2 years, now I can think about getting some very expensive grafted trees because all that stuff was practically free. Here's a Mexican sunflower. I got that from the side of the road. This is a random hibiscus that the bird pooped out randomly. This is lemongrass I got from my friend's property. Here's Mexican petunia that I got from a ditch. Here's sweet potato that I got from my friend's property. Bananas that I got from my friend's property. Cassavas that I got from my friend's property. And that friend is mostly Jacob.
Do you eat the variegated cassava?
I believe you can't.
No, you can, I was.
Oh, you can.
Yeah. My yard guy, he moved away, but he was from Guatemala.
Okay.
And he told me that they like to have it in the morning with their coffee. And I'm like, so he sends me a picture, he's got like Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup, and he's got a baggie, and it looks like hunks of sweet potato, but he's boiled it with sugar and is eating the variegated one from my yard.
Oh, the variegated one. So maybe, I think so. I think the variegated one is.
It was very orange colored.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's good. That's awesome. I didn't know that. For some reason, I had it in my head that the variegated one maybe you should stay away from eating, but everything
I read
else.
something like that, that's why I wondered.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Ate it, but I mean, he said it was great.
And he's still alive to tell the tale? Okay, well, I'll take his word for it. But yeah, that is true. Yucca, cassava root, is a very, for the Germans and the rest of the Europeans, they have wheat. For us South Floridians, we have cassava and other crops, root crops specifically, that we can make flours and stuff out of. So it's very traditional in a lot of places.
I make buñuelos out of that.
You make buñuelos, exactly. So you know
That's
what
like
it is.
donuts.
Exactly. It's like fried dough, cassava dough
Do you
with
eat
sugar.
the variegated one then?
No, I don't have no, I have the regular one.
I'll do it. I'm a citizen scientist, so I'll experiment for you, Bonnie.
Well, I
Yeah,
have it,
and
you
I'll-
can come
I'll report
pick
back.
up a root.
Yeah, I have a medical expert by my side just in case, but I think I'll do it.
This is, and sugar.
You gotta give them two roots, one for eating, one for planting.
Yeah, and
You don't plant the root, you take a cutting and.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how it looks. My property looks now. And remember, it started with a barren patch of land with some scraggly early acacias, some Brazilian peppers, and a lot of bahia grass or whatever that grass was. And in short order, a short amount of time, I converted it into something that has. I wish I had a list of all the things that are growing here, but I'll try to rattle them off the top of my head. There's mango trees, avocado trees. There's star fruits. There's cassava, there's lemongrass, there's sweet potatoes, there's Mexican sunflower, there's Napier grass, there is lots of turmeric right now, there is bananas everywhere, there is hibiscuses, all these different types of edible leaf hibiscuses, there is Hong Kong orchids, there's native mahoganies, there's obviously the pine trees that I've maintained, there's Mexican petunias, there's native grasses, bunch grasses that have just come up as well. There's carrot wood, there's the tiniest little Brazilian pepper that's trying to survive, but it can't anymore because Brazilian pepper does not like shade. So the Brazilian pepper could not survive in a climate like in a place like this, which is why they do what they do, because they only can survive in very, very compacted, very, very sun exposed, pretty much a destroyed landscape is what they love the most. That's why Brazilian pepper loves it so much here, because we destroyed this landscape, or at least have altered it to a different place. But man, there's so much here. There's probably over 50 species in a quarter acre. Let's just call it a quarter acre for ease. 50 to 100 different species if you count the different varieties in a quarter acre plot. Now imagine if you take an eighth of an acre of every single property out in the States, the county said we need to put an eighth of an acre into food forest production. Imagine that abundance for our kids and our kids' kids in the future.
Question. Any chance not scared to step on something unwanted animal there,
Totally. Just like when you're in the jungle and you're in the forest, you watch where you step. It's the same here. Anytime people visit the food forest, I make sure to tell them, this is like you're going to the woods. You want boots and you want pants. And obviously I'm extreme, so I let it get to this level because that's what I like. But you can tailor it to what you want, and you can make it more a little bit more cleaner and a little bit more easier to get through. But I love hiking in the mountains and being in the middle of the jungle. It's just my personal preference. So I constructed my food forest to fit my personal preference. But yeah, you don't have to. It doesn't have to look like. It doesn't have to be crazy amounts of vegetation. But yeah, there are times where I'm stepping and I see a black racer, a black snake, just scurry away, do its thing. But most of the time, they're not so dangerous animals. They're mainly just the black snakes, and maybe the occasional spider inside of a banana leaf, But nothing too crazy, thankfully, not yet. But when you build for abundance, you're definitely building for wildlife. So there is going to be a lot of wildlife for sure. There's tons of rabbits. I gotta say that.
But what about armadillos?
They have,
Armadillos?
Armadillos? I haven't seen one
I got
yet.
a bunch.
I have armadillo.
Yeah.
What about iguanas? You want some?
No, I haven't seen too many iguanas.
Dig in the plant's house.
That's because
Yeah,
of my
they don't
neighbors.
do that to mine.
They don't have
that
much on their property, so I'm the only place where they can live.
Damn.
Do you have any
Well, I got a
room
lot
that
of
I
plants.
want?
Did
I
it?
have 4
Do you have
acres.
any room left?
But yeah, I live on an acre and some change.
Yeah,
So I have
Diggers.
3/4, let's just say half acre left.
They're cute.
But I'm only one person, I can't do it all. So that's something down the line.
In my backyard.
But right now, that back half of the property is filled with Brazilian pepper, acacias, and it's a sanctuary for wildlife. Both of my neighbors have clear cut from both sides all the way down. So that little back patch, that's kind of taken over with muscadine grapes, the air potatoes. It's kind of a little bit of everything. The wildlife absolutely loves it back there, and the migrating ducks this year, they chose that place to roost at night, which was cool. It was cool to see that every morning they would come out of the woods of the Brazilian pepper hedge. They would come down. That's their shelter. And they would come out every morning, and then every evening they would come right back. They would fly super low. They would like circle, see my 2 neighbors who have absolutely nothing growing, and then they'll go vroom, right to my backyard.
Yeah, but are you concerned about, like, I always think about the size the tree's gonna be, and you said that you have a bunch of mangoes and avocados and stuff. What if a bunch of them grow large and they're too close together?
Well, then that's
That's the editing side of things.
huh?
That's the editing side of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the editing side of
Just make a
it.
choice, which one looks better, pull that.
Exactly. It's kind of like it's like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. If you see, no, that's really what it is. You see one plant growing and another plant growing, you'd be like, All right, what do I want? You have to make an executive decision. You know, if you want to have an abundance like that, death is a part of life, right? So in order to have this much abundance, you need to pull the cord on a lot of things so that other things can grow. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm waiting for them to grow to see because a lot of them will die on their own. A freeze will come, and guess what? A lot of them are gonna die. I learned from the first frost, I am not buying crazy expensive, rare grafted fruit trees until I have a very secure microclimate, because that was we all went through it, I'm pretty sure. We lost a lot of plants that we spent some good money on, and I don't want to fall into that trap again. So yeah, there's I'm pretty long-winded, I know, and I can talk for forever, but I'd rather show the process and show people the food forest. So I plan on having guided tours that we can take together as a group, and we can ask a lot more detailed questions there, because I like to show people things. But obviously, any questions are.
Okay, I saw you cut a lot of wood log,
Yes.
like this length.
Mm-hmm.
You use as mulch. Have you used that as a hugo bed?
Yes, sort of like a Hugo. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Some dirt surrounded you like put soil on top of it.
Yes, I put soil on top. So this particular, because we live in a place where we're able to get soil, topsoil, and free mulch and things like that, I sort of fast tracked it. This would probably take a good 3 years to establish if I didn't have mulch or soil or anything. If I'm starting from scratch like I am in Honduras. So I was able to fast track it by I put the logs down, and then on top of that I put the mulch, and then I made like little beds, and then I bought topsoil, black topsoil from some, I forget exactly where, I think it was in Estero. And I made sort of like raised bed type of things, but using the wood around it. So yes, I did definitely put some inputs into this. This was not all just the plants. It was a combination of hugelculture type beds, with some topsoil, and then the seeds and all that came afterwards. So yes, there was definitely some hugelculture going on for sure.
Now, Kevin, you're saying all of your irrigation comes from your bananas?
At first it didn't. I had to irrigate because I was starting from scratch. But nowadays, a lot of it is not only coming from the bananas, but it's coming from underneath all that. At the height of the drought in December, January, February, I'll do a tour then, because I want people to feel how it feels underneath there. It's still so wet.
What?
And
6 or 12 inches down?
Yeah, about 6 inches down.
So you're not watering at all?
Right now, I'm only spot watering because my bananas are flowering, and I want to give them a little boost. But irrigation is done at this point. The first year I had to do irrigation, but right now I'm not. No irrigation. I irrigate using my bananas. I chop them up, and I split them in half, and I put them face down, and over time they bloop, bloop, bloop. It's sort of like a drip irrigation. So the plants that I want for them to survive the dry season, I'll focus on them, plants that I know that aren't as tough as the other plants. The mangoes, I don't really worry too much about. Mangoes are pretty tough, but other plants for sure, I definitely use the bananas for that.
I drove out, because I live along Collier, I drove out to a friend's out in the Estates weeks after the freeze we had on the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed, the thatched palms or pine trees. I'd see, like a row of collusia, and then they have 2 palms. It's not burnt here, but it's burnt here. And it wasn't burnt, things weren't burnt under the pine trees. But I took out all the pines on my property. I took out my canopy layer. And I was not even thinking about that. I was thinking about the pine bark beetles are killing them.
No, of
I
course.
come in, have those cut out, and
No, of
tree
course.
source destroys other stuff.
Yeah.
So on February 5th, I went, shh.
No, for sure, and you're not the only one, you know,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, your neighbors.
no, it's,
Poincianas are a good canopy.
yeah, poincianas.
They're
I
kind of
do-
sacrificial, they'll die, but they do protect all the other plants.
Another really good one, the citrus industry uses it a lot for windbreaks, is the, what's the name of the eucalyptus? Corymbia terrulliana. Have you guys ever drove around town and seen these like gray, sort of slippery looking trunks on these big trees that sort of look like
The green
eucalyptus? Yeah,
Yeah. What are they called?
they're called Corymbia, Corynbia. And you can get them at nurseries like in Central Florida. I think, what's that I don't know what it's called. But there is nurseries in Central Florida more where citrus industry is actually doing decently. They'll provide you with these eucalyptus trees that grow super fast. So if you want something to replace those pines, that's a really good option because.
I have some of those,
Mhm.
and I was told, Bob Cook told me that they grow like 12 feet a year, and when the wind blows, they break. Well, if you drive on, I think Santa Barbara, Davis, you'll see them along the outer edges of communities.
Yes, correct.
They're still there.
Yeah.
I drove around, they didn't.
Well, see, that's another thing that happens a lot is that people say these things, and then the other person says it, and it's like a game of telephone. By the time it reaches you, you're like, oh, okay, I gotta make sure, not to put too many pine needles because it's too acidic and it's gonna kill all the plants. Okay, sure. Meanwhile, I started with pine needles. Obviously, didn't kill any of my plants.
Personal observation, I don't think with our high pH you could put enough pine needles there.
Exactly.
To lower the pH significantly.
Yeah, exactly. Or makes it higher. I forget what it was, but you know what I'm saying. So there are a lot of these things that are sort of in that same mindset of all invasive species are bad. You must get them all. You must kill them all. Or that tree is bad because it breaks in the wind. Or this or that. There's a lot of these sayings that a lot of people say, but that's all they do is they say it. You have to try it to believe it. To see it for your own eyes. And
Well, look around town, and those green eucalyptus trees are. There's like 1 in 50 missing when you go down the street.
For sure. And those trees are somewhat brittle compared to other trees though. It's because they grow so fast, they are brittle. So what we do is when they get to a certain height, we chop them at that height so that they keep growing only from there. And they'll produce, remember that tree that I showed you that was starting to produce like that? They grow a little afro. That's kind of how it is.
Like moringa.
Yeah, like
Great job,
moringa.
Chadwick.
Okay, thank you.
Great job.
And so we utilize that tree a lot because it grows so fast. Remember, we need backups. We need reinforcements here because South Florida, like I said, the landscape was an aquatic landscape. We're living in a completely new landscape, and it's up to us to try to make it something that is fertile for us. Because if you think about other places like river valleys, and those are very fertile, very lush, and good for human habitation. So we need to introduce new plants to help make this landscape habitable for us as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different species that you can use. And
One question.
yeah.
With the logs that you buried 2 years ago, have you been able to check to see the decomposition and what's happening to them?
Yes, I have. I always check, and they're not there anymore. It's pretty much soil at this point. Yeah, and it's quick. We live in Florida. There's no cold winters that sort of halt biological activity. We live in Florida where if you put mulch on the ground, by 1 year later, in the course of a year, that's not going to be there anymore. Like things eat fat. it goes to show how hungry South Florida is because of this new landscape that we have. It needs food. It needs to be feeding because it's not used to not having, you know, water on top of it. Every year it would rain, and then the Everglades would get filled out, and then the water would just steep in there. If you guys ever been walking in the swamps, you'll see that water is like brown and murky, and there's leaves, and that's how we used to be fertile. Before we drained the swamps, it was the swampy water. It was kind of like this big giant compost tea, was the Everglades. But now that we made it, we canalized it, we need to feed it something, and trees and trunks and wood is the best option we have. But that's about it. This is my, I don't want to keep, you know, I felt like I've been talking for a lot, and I don't want to keep you guys up too much, so this is, I kind of just want to end off on something, here. This is the Amazon rainforest, and we have a path to choose going forward. We can choose this path, or we can choose this path. And it's up to us to choose which one we want to leave for our children, and our children's children, and our children's children's children, and so on and so forth. So, you know, we have the power to do this, or we have the power to do this. And if you're with me, we're going to do this all throughout the South Florida and all throughout the estates, so that we, as neighbors, can have an abundant place for our communities and for our children in the future. And that's it. Yeah, man. And I'll talk about Honduras in the next time you guys have me.
No, that's fine.